Welcome to another episode of NBM Talks, a series of the Narrative-Based Medicine Lab, where we speak with individuals who are working at the intersection of literature, medicine, and health. Our guests are writers, clinicians, scholars, artists, and advocates who are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the field. Together we discuss how we can engage with narrative-based medicine principles and practices in creative and diverse ways. We hope you enjoy this episode. Darian Goldin Stahl is an interdisciplinary printmaker whose work explores themes of healthcare, disability, and well-being. After earning an MFA in printmaking from the University of Alberta, she completed a research creation PhD in humanities at Concordia. Her dissertation, Embodied Books, Experiencing the Health Humanities Through Artist Books, was published by Peter Lang International Academic Publishers in 2024. She was awarded a Shirk Banting postdoctoral fellowship at the UNBC Northern Medical Program, which she used to launch the Embodied Books project. This initiative empowers intrepid bookmakers to create new artist books on personal medical experiences. Documentation of this project is available at www.embodiedbooks.com. Darian's own artist books are included in many permanent collections around the world, such as the Wellcome Collection in London, the Moody Library at Baylor University in Texas, the Thomas Fisher Rare Book Library at the University of Toronto, and the Herron Library at Indiana University. More of her work can be viewed at dariangoldinstahl.com. She joins us today from Kelowna, British Columbia. Darian, we're delighted to have you joining us again at the lab and really looking forward to hearing you tell us more about your work and your adventures.
Well, thank you so much, Damian, for having me on the show. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Well, we could talk about many different things, many of your different projects. I've given our listeners a bit of a sense of your background, but wondering if you could elaborate on it a little bit, tell us about how, in particular, you came to work in health humanities and embodied books.
Yeah, I would love to. And it's not an obvious connection, I think. As a printmaker and a bookmaker, suddenly finding myself, doing a postdoc at a school of medicine. It was a kind of long and winding journey, but I can pinpoint maybe the beginning of it as an undergrad at Indiana University and taking up printmaking as my art of choice. That's what I decided to major in. And I took these other courses that I was interested in about the history of medicine. And what I really discovered in those courses was just how intertwined the history of medicine is with the progression of printmaking, that these two fields really needed each other to create a collaboration and to educate one another and strive for more detailed and precise methods of communicating the body. So as printmaking methods became more detailed and precise, so too could the messages of medicine and anatomy educate their viewership. And my professor at the time knew that I was a printmaker and had me bring in my plates to show my other classmates, and I found that really encouraging. So I wanted to explore more about this topic of the connections of medicine and printmaking, but through a more contemporary lens. What would these books of anatomy look like if the prints were of women's bodies and contemporary landscapes and not, the rolling Italian countryside of Vesalius's muscle men? So that became the focus of my artistic career. And then when I started my master's degree, my sister Devon Stahl was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And she thought, well, since you're already interested in the connection between scans and images of the body, why don't you use my MRI scans in your artwork? So she procured a copy of all of her MRI scans from her neurologist that were copied to a CD and gave them to me. And I'm looking through these images of her body, and they really struck me. I think because, these weren't just anonymous cadavers from centuries ago. These were images of my sister's body, images that cut through her eyes and her brain and her spine, and I couldn't even recognize her face, a face that looked so much like mine. But here they were totally anonymous and maybe even alienating, maybe even kind of grotesque. And that's really not how I see my sister at all. So I wanted to represent those images of her anatomy through my printmaking practice, But in order to do that, I felt like I also had to represent her story, that these images are of her. And in order to do that, I really wanted to include her voice as a part of that imagery. And through my printmaking training, I was also trained in artist books. These two kind of media are often intertwined with one another in academia. So I had this vehicle where I could at once print the images of her body and include her text, her illness diagnosis or illness narrative within the same vehicle, and print them one another so that the images of her body could no longer be viewed in isolation away from her humanity. And that's what really started this now over decade-long collaboration of working with my sister to represent lived experiences of illness through the medium of artist books. And that really became the focus of all of my studies and publications and artistry ever since.
I feel like I need to ask you about 10 questions or 20 questions about all this. It's so fascinating. Maybe in particular, you could tell us a little bit more about two aspects. It sounds like there's an effort to make something that's become supposedly objective or scientific or rendered instrumental and atomized, to make that personal again for you and for your sister, but also that this work is collaborative, and that's not something that we often or always encounter in narrative-based medicine or in artistic works more generally. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, about the nature of that collaboration?
Yes, I feel a huge responsibility to represent another person's body in ways that feel authentic and humanizing and personal to that person. I think, at least with my sister's experience being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, she felt at the time of her diagnosis a bit dismissed. She had asked her neurologist, and she had had many, many months of misdiagnoses. MS is, very variable from person to person, so it can take a little bit of time to be accurately diagnosed. So she had been in the medical system for many months at this point before receiving this diagnosis. And in that moment, she asked her neurologist to share with her what he saw in those images. And instead of taking his eyes off of the computer screen, he said, "I'm a specialist. I know what I'm looking for." And that was really hurtful, I think, to my sister. And it felt like those images of her body weren't her own anymore, that they belonged to her neurologist, to the institution of medicine. So I think that part of collaborating with me was a reclamation of her medicalized body and of those images that may have felt very everyday to her neurologist, but to her were monumental. That meant so much. And I don't think he really realized it in that moment. So for her and I to work together to repurpose those images, to have them again represent her and her humanity and her emotions in that moment, I think was quite healing. And it made our relationship honestly so much closer. I had felt quite a difficulty talking to my own sister about her life-changing diagnosis. I think we grew up in a family that was quite maybe buttoned up or not very emotional. And it just felt so much easier to not talk about it or to be really positive all the time, which in another way kind of dismissed her feelings again. And I have a lot of regret about that. But I do think that now working together and collaborating with one another is doing so many things at once. It's allowing my sister to reclaim a sense of agency over her medicalized body and those images. It also makes our relationship stronger, that we're working together still to this day. I just interviewed my own sister last week about a new project that we're working on. And she'll say this, it's a part of being vulnerable, but having strength in that vulnerability to tell your story. It is in her control now to invite me to represent her story in my artwork. And it's through that invitation where she's actually the one in control here. These aren't things that are happening to her. These aren't things that people are telling her about her body. She really has agency to be the one to tell us what we need to know about her. And that has been very empowering.
It sounds like there's a required and really important kind of nuance there of returning a story that's been taken or claimed or medicalized, and finding a different way to tell it, in a collaborative way, and a more agent-filled way to retell it and make it new again.
Yeah.
We've mentioned in your story this, we've talked about printmaking, we've talked about artist books, and we've mentioned embodied books. Could you give us a definition? You tell us what is an embodied book? What are your projects in this area? How do embodied books bring together your different fields of interest?
Yes. I think the title embodied books, I've been using it for a few years now, and I think it really captures what the art of bookmaking and artist books have to offer us. That these are narratives, and I say narratives in a very loose way. Some of these books don't have any text whatsoever, but they use the time capacities of turning pages. It is a time-based medium to let a story unfold. So a narrative can be expressed, a story can be expressed without any words whatsoever, if that feels most comfortable for the artist. And what these artist books are doing is filling a space between people. This isn't a text that you're reading on a computer screen or kind of in this ephemeral 8.5 by 11 printout from your printer. These are handmade objects. And because the artist is able to control every single aspect of their book, including the color, the materials, the textures, the gestures of turning pages, even imbuing them with sense, they incense our capacities to communicate through our bodies. So we're holding the books close in this intimate space between our hands and our hearts to read the book. And it is this one-on-one encounter with another person's, you might call them a book body, an embodied book. And it just allows a lot more empathy, I think, because you're having to engage with it with your own body. And we normally wouldn't touch another person's body when we're interviewing them. That's really not socially acceptable, I think, anymore, particularly after COVID. We're a lot more, I would say, even hesitant to shake hands with people that we don't know. But you're handing this object as a kind of bodily proxy for yourself and your diagnosis and your illness and your daily life living with symptoms. And you're saying, this is something that's very important that I think I'd like you to know about me. And here's a safe way for me to express that to you and to make it one time. And then I can share it over and over and over again so that I am not constantly having to retell my story to every new provider or every new person that I want to share my story with. So I think that encapsulates what embodied books is. And I might back up a little bit and talk about the Embodied Books project, if that's okay with you, Damian.
Yeah, please do. I was just going to ask you. So, you sit down with patients and I know as well with practitioners to encourage them to lead them into to making their own books. And I was curious, what do they look like? What kind of things do people create? So yeah, what happens in the Embodied Books project?
The collaboration between my sister and I evolved quite significantly when I started my PhD at Concordia University, where I was really given the time and space to travel to different collections of artist books that are devoted to expressing illnesses and disabilities and caretaking and mortality and all sorts of medical experiences. And one in particular was the prescriptions collection at the University of Kent in Canterbury, England. And that was founded by Dr. Stella Balaki. And I really was able to see the breadth of what bookmakers can do, how they are transforming this really familiar object of a book. I think in our minds, we can all picture what a book looks like. It's rectangular. It might have a hard cover that is covering a bunch of loose bound pages inside the book. Okay, I think that's what we can all picture in our minds. But these books were so unique. I think they would even push the boundaries of what you might consider to be a book. And there were some scrolls that were really, really tightly bound and then placed within vials. And then those vials were kept in a box, like a beautiful clamshell box that you would open up, unscrew the lid of each vial, take out the little scroll and put it back in. I mean, these were really deconstructed, amazingly interactive kinds of books. And all of those choices that the artists made told you something about their bodies. Like there was another book that was covered in resin so that it was so stiff you couldn't even turn the pages anymore. And that was meant to express the artist's seizing joints. She had this degenerative disease that made her joints become stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. And her book perfectly communicated that as this sculptural object. And it was there that I also encountered the work of Martha Hall. And she was a woman who lived with cancer for over 15 years before she finally passed away from the disease in 2003. And the remarkable thing about Martha Hall isn't only that she created artist books about living under the specter of disease for over a decade. It was that she took those books, her artist books, and brought them into her medical appointments and told her physicians, we are not continuing with this appointment until you come out from behind your desk, sit next to me, and look at this artist book together, because it explains how I felt when you told me that I had failed. And what he meant was that her tests had failed, but what he said was, you failed. And that hurt her. And she felt that she could no longer have a trusting relationship with her oncologist until he knew that and acknowledged that his manner of speaking to her hurt her. And together they were able to rebuild the relationship only because she felt that she had the authority to begin that difficult conversation with the assistance of her artist book. And it was this practice of reintroducing artist books to those very same medical practitioners that are featured in the artist book that inspired my Banting postdoctoral fellowship project at the UNBC Northern Medical Program, Embodied Books. And these are 5-week-long courses that I developed with patient groups, self-identified patient groups. I held them in community art centers and not in hospitals because I wanted it to be a creative and artistic atmosphere. So anyone could come, and people came who were self-identified as disabled or ill or chronically ill or caretakers of a loved one who had passed away. And I provided all the materials and all the know-how for them to create their own books about their own lived experiences of medicine and illness, and just the breadth and beauty of what they were able to accomplish in just 5 weeks is truly astounding. And these were folks who wouldn't necessarily consider themselves fine artists. A lot of them, this was kind of their first art project ever, but they were inspired by the idea that they had something to say back to medicine. And that was kind of the promise of the Embodied Books project. You are going to create an artist book about your lived experiences of medicine, and then they will exist on this online platform, and they will be circulated within medical education and professionalizing workshops or courses. And I think that was really motivating for them to sign up and do this work, because it turns out they had a lot to say. They used the full breadth of materials that I had brought for them, and then things that they continued to bring from home. So these are things like medical documents, sandpaper, stones, clothespins, needles, ribbons, strings, balloons, feathers, leather. I mean, all sorts of different kinds of materials that when you're hand making a book, you could include. So I think that's what makes the handmade object really unique and different than, say, zines or publishing a book, is that you can really add these alternative materials into your works. They used art methods like collage and drawing and painting, string assemblage, paper art, footage, photography, sewing. I kind of made these lists because I just presented on this. So I had them ready. And then different kinds of sensory engagements with these materials. Some of them were very soft, some of them were very sharp. Like putting needles in your book is a strong gesture. It represents your own pain, but also maybe is a little dangerous for the reader. They might also feel this very real sympathetic pain if they get, pricked by the needle that you've included in your book. And this was a strategy to tell the readers exactly, or metaphorically or literally, the pain that they're feeling in their own bodies. And all of these works are on my website, embodiedbooks.com, and I would encourage anyone and everyone to check them out. They're so poignant and so moving, I think. And it's like you can feel them. I realize that this is a digital medium, the internet, and artist books are really meant to be held and experienced. But I've photographed every single page of every single book and put them on the internet so that you can imagine feeling the felt. You can imagine putting together the puzzle pieces that the artist has laid out for you. And I think that's as good as it can be through the internet. So many of these artist book archives that I've engaged with are pretty limited on what you can see on their online library platform. It maybe has a picture of the cover, but typically it's just the title, and then it's up to you to go to that institution and check them out at the library or set up the reading room and engage with them that way. That can be a huge barrier, I think, for people to engage with artist books. So I wanted to lower the barriers as much as possible and really share this work in the easiest kinds of ways so that they can have the biggest impacts.
So if I'm listening and I'm inspired and I'm excited by what you've said, well, I am as we're talking, but imagining myself as our audience, eager to try something similar and wanting to know how to begin, is that your suggestion? Is that the first step to making one's own embodied books? Use those as a model, or begin on your website, or what do we do?
I would say that's a great idea. Go see what other people have made, and you'll find that the structures aren't necessarily complex. What I really like about artist books is that they can be extremely simple, or they can be really, really complex. I think the barriers to entry bookmaking are quite low. So you could possibly emulate what you see on the website. I also think that there's so much on YouTube, truly, about bookmaking. This is a niche part of the art world, but a very passionate one. And makers have these tutorials on YouTube on how to make quite simple book forms or really exquisite book forms that they're sharing for everyone on YouTube. But if you're wanting to make a artist book on a medical topic in particular, my published book, Embodied Books, Experiencing the Health Humanities Through Artist Books, does have in the final section a step-by-step process on how to transform an internal sensation, or what you might call a symptom, into an external objectified artist book. And if you have institutional library access, you should be able to download it for free.
And I'll add, as someone who's been a participant in your workshops, that There is something quite unique about this experience of making the book and as you say, physicalizing what's in your body, but giving it a physical form outside yourself using these methods and tools. It's quite magical. It's quite revelatory. It seems to offer us something not just as patients and practitioners, but also as I guess we're narrative-based medicine people. We're health humanists. It seems to offer something quite unique and quite special to this field that is otherwise missing. Would you agree with that?
I completely agree with that. I think as academics in particular, we are trained to communicate through language. We all are to various degrees, but I think especially the higher you get in education, the more and more specialized your language becomes, to where even those outside of your field can't really follow along with what you're saying anymore because it's become so specific. And what artist books do is take an idea that might be really, really complex and translate it into material, into color, into gesture, into a haptic sensation. And it's surprising how expressive and accurate you can be without any words at all. I think that was maybe one of the revelatory moments that you're speaking of, Damian, was handing your artist book to another person and thinking, oh, there's no way they're going to be able to discern what I was thinking about when I was making this book, because there's not a lot of words in here. And how can someone understand my body without that bridge of language? But they could. And they used their own senses to hold your book and to flip through the pages and to make sense out of the disparate elements, the collaged elements, put them all together and come up with a conclusion. And maybe that conclusion is 100% accurate. And then you have the delight of like, oh, yes, that's it. That is exactly what I was trying to communicate. That's amazing that you were able to understand it with very little words expressed in this book. Or I would say the opposite is also true. You handed your book to someone else and they came to a conclusion that was not at all what you were intending, but it is also true that someone could come to a different conclusion based on the same book, the same kinds of elements put together, but coming to a different conclusion. And that makes you reflect on yourself. Well, maybe that is a part of my story too, that their interpretation does also make a kind of sense for my body. And it's that, hearing another person's interpretation, that I think is this really powerful thing of connecting two different people's consciousnesses together. And I think it also can assist in what medical humanists call uncertainty and being comfortable with uncertainty or comfort with ambiguity. I mean, that's one of the big goals of medical humanities that we kind of hear over and over again. And it can be a scary kind of space to not know, or to come to a different conclusion when you're talking about a patient. But when we're thinking about artist books, they're not asking you to diagnose them. They're asking you to connect with them on an emotional, embodied level, a values-based level. And I think that's what they're accomplishing.
I'll say firsthand that that's been my experience as well, that they do accomplish that it's an intriguing process to work with materials that you're unfamiliar with, that you're new to, and discover that you are able to make a mode of communication that you didn't even know existed. And exactly as you say, sometimes it's understood, seems to be understood perfectly, and sometimes it's received in a completely different way than what you intended. And both those things are equally valuable, equally fascinating. You've put it perfectly. You've given us such interesting, such exciting places to go, Darian. We're going to send people to embodiedbooks.com. Are there any other developing projects that you'd like to tell us about, or you can preview, or something coming down the line next that we can expect?
Yes, I would love to. I have a forthcoming chapter in the edited volume Embodied Narratives, and that's edited by Eftahia Mialekis and Lucille Toth, and that's published by the University of Toronto Press, hopefully this year in the fall. But I have a new series of artist books that I'm working on right now called Birthwork, where I'm interviewing different difficult journeys to motherhood. I'm interviewing 2 women that have disabilities and diagnoses that make it very difficult for them to have children naturally. I'm interviewing 2 doulas and knowledge keepers, and then 1 fertility research scientist. And all of these books are going to be held together as this kind of investigation of perinatal experiences for the 21st century, experiences that are highly medicalized, and then the other end of the pendulum, this desire to return to more natural ways. So that is a work in progress, and hopefully I will have images of that work on my website as well as a teaching guide to make it easier for medical practitioners or medical professors to incorporate this kind of work in their medical humanities coursework by September, I'm hoping.
Well, those sound like fascinating projects, like everything that you do. It's so rich and so exciting to hear about. We'll send people to DarianGoldinStahl.com and embodiedbooks.com, and I imagine there's going to be quite a profusion of embodied books being made around the lab and by our listeners over the next little while. Thanks to you.
I hope so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Damian.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, check out many other episodes. And if you're interested in learning more about narrative-based medicine, visit us online at narrativebasedmedicine.ca for more great content and to explore our upcoming offerings.